Oh.
I have a job for you. I think I broke their toilet. The handle, when I pushed it down, it flushed, but it
I don't know if that's going to
came
attach
unattached.
to your camera or not.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave because I don't think it'll flush again.
Where do you go to church?
Give me my bag. Come
I
check
said,
it.
go to Tom Brown's. She goes, oh, so you go to church. Well, I was hoping that I could bring you to church with me. She's the cutest little old lady. And we were driving somewhere, and she's out in the yard.
Chill out.
And I said, hi, Jean. I said, thanks for that pie. She goes, honey, I'll make you a pie anytime you want. You just let me know.
Patty had a cute motivational thing up there, and
That's pretty cool.
changed it up.
Oh my goodness. Ah.
Huh.
Okay.
Works, Clyde.
Oh, you
I say God is good, wouldn't you?
I didn't know you had one of those.
It's only a, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's
Y'all
cool.
been running me out of the rooms for years with this thing.
Bye, honey lamb.
Well, come on and have a seat.
You're
Find a place to
You're not
park.
doing this legally, are you?
What?
I mean, you're not reading stuff, are you?
No,
Come sit down.
I was told to sit here, Helen.
There's no right or
Why?
wrong to this.
How do you, okay. I need to get it, there we go. I need to get, somehow
Next
get
to
it
that.
adjusted down or something, yeah. Cause the camera's pointing at the ceiling.
You guys cool enough? Please take any of the pillows off and throw them on the ground if you're uncomfortable.
I'm fine.
Lisa,
Nice and comfy.
you're so cute. I've got a little tilt there. Is that supposed to be like that?
Yeah, because I didn't want to put it on the wood.
Put on the glass.
Oh, wait.
So what do you got there, Dad?
This is just part of that
Still too high?
autobiography I tried
Well, it's
to
crooked.
together.
Oh,
Are you winking at your mom? David?
what?
That's better, hang on. a
Jacqueline's
minute.
winking at you. Did you wink at Uncle Kim? Did you wink
You
at
don't-
Uncle
Yeah.
Kim?
Go on, Helen.
Come tell me how, if that's close enough in for you.
I don't want a picture taken.
Your great-grandchildren will appreciate it. I wish I had my
Oh.
granny's picture.
Yeah, maybe. Can you zoom in
A little closer.
more?
What's that big old thing?
This camera.
You can
Where'd
put
you
the
get that?
pillows down if you don't want them up there.
Yeah, that's probably good. If you,
Mom.
you can have to back it out a little bit.
Whatever makes you
Madison.
comfy.
Yeah, that makes me comfy.
It is, it's crooked, it's kinda going,
Is yours on?
it's still kinda going like
Oh
off
my
to the side a
goodness,
little
it's
bit.
not
I mean,
doing it
it's gonna
now.
bother you when you watch
Oh,
it, you know.
Kim, that's sneaky.
Is that worse or better?
That's better. Let's turn it.
I wasn't fretting about this today because I figured he was going to be having his picture taken.
Well, you don't have to fret about having your picture taken.
I do.
So what we were planning to do was just give you a chance to talk a little bit. If you had something to tell your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren about
Is his on?
things you experienced and what your life was like and, you know, all those things that I was telling Dave the other day. I wish I had pictures of Bebop, you know, the stories that he used to tell and things that he did that I heard and Clyde may have heard some of and Carl didn't hear much of and my kids don't really know much of that stuff. So, Lisa, can you think of anything to ask him?
Granddaddy?
Mhm.
Well, you were in the war, right?
Right.
Well, I'd like to know what you did.
Hmm?
What you did. Like, what is, everybody has a job when they're like on the boats and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah. So what was your job on there?
well, let me think a second. Yeah, when I got transferred to sea, to a ship, I was a photographer.
Well, tell him how you got to do that. Or you kept bugging them and bugging them and bugging them.
Yeah, when I went in, I had been working at Bud Manufacturing in Philadelphia. And we made truck bodies and frames and these stainless steel passenger cars.
Yeah.
So when I went over and signed up, I said I wanted to apply for an aviation metalsmith, sheet metal work. So the guy, they could give me credit for working in it, And normally when you went in apprentice seaman. So I went in as a first class seaman. They jumped me two ranks because of my metal work at Bud's. And I went in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, and
The war was already on?
yeah, I went in October '42 when I went in, and one of the things, I never went to boot camp. There was, there was a half a dozen of us, I guess, that went in at the same time, and they had different types of trades that they had. And they did similar to what I did. They went up a couple ranks due to what they had been doing. But we never went to boot camp.
But most people had to.
Oh yeah, like
Even though-
Levi went through boot camp. I think I
You went home the first night.
no, not the first night, it wasn't. I think it was the third night. The third night after I went in, I went home. Because I lived across the river in the Navy Yard in South Philly. So I just went uptown and got a bus and went over home in Camden. And we were down there about 2 weeks. And they shipped us up to Willow Grove Air Station, which is just a little bit north of Philadelphia, about 20 miles. And a little town called Hatboro. And they had bought up a lot of this farmland around there and were turning it into a Navy base, airfield. We got up there and they had us out digging up huge old oak trees where they wanted to move them and plant them somewhere else on this farm, so they could put their runways in and build Quonset huts and barracks and stuff like that. But we called ourselves the birdseed detail.
We planted trees.
That's all we did for, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. When we didn't have the duty section, just like Levi, we went home or went wherever we wanted to. And
So that was close to home.
yeah, it was about, I guess, 30 miles from Camden. And while we were there, they had a small photo lab attached to it. And I kept going up to the office, hounding them to get into that. So finally I got assigned over there, got out of the birdseed detail. And
That was on the base.
was on the base, and it was a primary training station for flyers. They had these 2 wing steermen, and that's what they trained them in. And basically our job in the photo department was some publicity photography, and when they smashed one up, we'd go take pictures of the wreck and that kind of thing. Oh, and they transferred us from there to another primary training base in Ottumwa, Iowa. And I did stayed in the photography part down there. And while I was there is when the government started the Navy V-12 program. That was for enlisted men to get a chance to become commissioned officers. And they gave you an examination, and I think there's something like 30 of us went up and applied for it. And 5 of us made it out of that 30. And they then took the 5 of us and sent us to St. Ambrose College in Davenport, Iowa, which was just up the river from Ottumwa. And we were there for a semester. And at that point, at the end of the semester, they shipped us to Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana.
This is the 5 of you that entered
Yeah.
the program together?
And some guys from some other schools. They moved a lot of people. But we went there as a group of us, plus the other people. And I spent too much time on John McCabe's horse farm and flunked calculus twice. So when I was home on leave in, it was 43, I got a telegram telling me that I had failed in the report back to the Philadelphia Navy Yard.
So you haven't ever been to sea? So you haven't been to sea so far?
Not up to that point.
Well, let me tell you something. Can I say something?
Oh, sure.
When he was in high school, he hadn't planned to go to college, so he didn't take any college prep courses. And his math was very basic. And I really believe he would not have done that. When he went into the training, he would have like maybe 2 weeks on trig, 2 weeks on whatever, another math. And he had no background for the calculus.
Mm-hmm.
And he is so good at, I really feel that if he had more of that in high school, that he wouldn't have failed it. Because, but I'm sure it worked out the way it was supposed to work out.
All right.
But it wasn't because of spending the time on the horse farm. I don't believe that.
Well, one of the
It's not
things,
irresponsible.
like your mother just said, we had about 2 weeks. It was supposed to be refresher courses.
Right.
And he hadn't
Of
had a course
algebra
to see.
and geometry and trigonometry. What's the next geometry?
Oh, plane geometry?
Yeah,
Plane and solid.
yeah, and we had solid.
And he hadn't had
And there were
them.
about 2 weeks each one of these.
The fact that he passed all of them, to me, shows that he could easily have done it if he'd had,
Oh.
if he'd had the background,
Mhm.
and he didn't.
But really, it worked out to my advantage because most of the ensigns that they made out of these V-12 guys ended up captains on landing craft. And most of them got shot up
Right.
out in the Pacific.
Huh.
So after I went back to the Navy Yard, then I got on a draft or a shipment to the West Coast, California, and into San Francisco. And they put us up in the Tan Ferran racetrack, is what it had been. And the government took it over after the war. And they interned the American Japanese in this racetrack.
There's a
And-
horse racing track?
Yeah, is what it had been. And the health department or somebody got on the Navy and told them it was unfit for human habitation. So the government made camps and moved the Japanese into these internment camps. So then the Navy moved all us sailors in after they moved the Japanese out. So we had bunks in these horse stalls. And we used to tease about we're in Seabiscuit's stall. And Seabiscuit was a real famous horse racer back at that time. And we were all a bunch of misfits. We'd flunk something or somewhere. That's what this group was. So,
The Dirty Dozen.
yeah, kind of. So, they finally got us together, and a whole bunch of guys from all over, in a convoy and troop ships, and they shipped us out to the Philippine Island. And it took us 38 days to get from San Francisco to the Philippines.
My goodness.
And we stopped at Hawaii, we stopped at Eniwetok, we stopped at, well, it's a big base now, Guam. We got piddled our way across the Pacific. And we got to the Philippines. Well, let me back up a minute there. I guess there were, I'm trying to remember, but there were about 15 or 20 ships in this convoy, plus destroyers running around the perimeter for convoy duty.
What kind of ship were you on?
Hmm?
What kind of ship were you on?
What kind of ship were you on?
These were APAs and AKA. They were freighters, basically. And the APAs were for passengers,
Okay.
and the AKAs were for cargo. The same hulls, they just set them up different inside. So that's how we went over there. So a convoy goes so that the slowest ship can keep up. Well, most of them would cruise at about 10 knots. 10, 12 knots. It took you a long time to get all the way across the Pacific at 12 or 15 miles an hour.
Yeah.
The only saving grace was you did it 24 hours a day. So we landed in the Philippines in their rainy season. So they got everybody's sea bags in big nets and unloaded them and dumped them in the rain. So when we got off, you had to go to this pile and try to find yours.
Your soggy
And,
sea bag.
100 of them in there or more. So by the time you got them, and they were wet, and so were you, and anyhow, they got us in tents, and they put us in these tents where they'd hold about 24 cots, about 12 down each side. They're a pretty long tent. And old wooden army cots are what you had to sleep on. And you lived out of your sea bag. You kept it right by the head of your bed. And we were unloading ships that would come in. We considered we were stevedores of what we were doing. And I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I had a friend that was a yeoman up in the main office, and that amounts to being a secretary in the Navy. And I told him about wanting to get back into photography, and he said, okay. He said, I'll help you. He said, I'll write the letters for you, and we'll go through the chain of command and trying to get you out of here. So he helped me compose a letter, and with my past experience and schooling and being a photographer in the States for the Navy. And so every once in a while, every week or so, he'd come and tell me, well, your letter's gone this far, I found out. So it would work its way up, and it got up to the office of Admiral Kincaid, who was the head of that part of the Pacific. So they approved it up there, and one night, the same yeoman come in, he said, get your gear back packed, we're cutting your orders to get out of here.
Huh.
So I got my stuff together, and there were 2 or 3 guys getting shipped out. They took us out and in an army truck and took us over and dumped us off at the edge of a Philippine cemetery. And there was a receiving ship across the road. So we spent the night in the cemetery and waiting for orders to where you're going from here, because none of us really knew. Well, I walked across to this receiving ship, is the Navy's term for it. It's a barracks for temporary people being moved around. And the officer of the day was a kid that I had been in Wabash with, and he had got flunked out. And he was here on this thing. Anyhow, the next day they got us together and took us out to a receiving ship that was anchored out in Manila Bay. And it was a great big concrete barge is what it was. And there were a couple decks to it. And you had a bunk or something there, but by the time we got there, the only space left was up on the top deck. And you spread your mattress and blanket down and slept up there, and I think I was on that thing 2 days. And then they called me to be sent over to the ship. And I was to be on the staff of Vice Admiral, or Rear Admiral, you will, Barbie. And he was in charge of the 7th Amphibious Forces in the Philippine section. Now that's where we went. I got aboard ship and started to work in the photo lab. And while I was doing that, I took the test and got to be 3rd class, like Levi's 3rd class machinist. And let's see, I'm trying to, I think that first ship was the Blue Ridge. And then they transferred us later on, the staff, to the Ancon. And the Ancon had been I've got pictures of them at home. The Ancon had been a cruise ship between South America and the United States.
Like a luxury liner for civilians.
Yes, it had been. And the Navy took it over for a flagship. Well, very, very un-Navy-like. Down into the mess hall was this big winding stairway. I guess it was about 10 feet wide. And had 4 or 5 steps and a landing and 4 or 5, you know, for people on a cruise. Well, there'd been all mirrors and everything on the walls, and they'd taken them all off and painted them gray. And we were on that thing until the armistice with the Japanese, and they took it away from us and put us on, what was it? There was a Rocky Mount, which was another GC. All the flagships in the fleet like that were GC, but they're all the same hulls, everything. And I think of the shipyard. They used to make the Willys Jeep too. Anyhow, I can't think right now, but they were all made the same way. And they took the Ancon up to Japan to be there because of all the communication that we had aboard it. Being a flagship for directing different landings and like that. It was just full of radio equipment and that type stuff. So they used it up there when they had the signing on the Missouri for the communication purposes. So we stayed on the Rocky Mount and went to China on it, and went to Korea on it, and Okinawa and we came home on it and landed down in San Diego.
So
when we came back.
that trip around the Orient, that was after the armistice?
You know, some of it was before. We went to China was afterward.
Uh-huh.
So, and J.W. Mays was in that same bunch that went to China
Oh,
on
really?
another ship. I found out after we got here and I met him and everything, we started comparing notes. And they sent us over there to try to help move Chiang Kai-shek's army up into northern China to combat these warlords that were gathering together with their armies to try to drive him out. And it's that group that became the communists.
Mm-hmm.
And they finally did. They drove him over to Taiwan. And he set up a government there that became a democracy. And we went up to a lot of little ports up in northern China. And the last one, I think, was a place called Hulu Tao. And it's right where China comes around like this, and you pick up Siberia and the mainland Manchuria,
Mm-hmm.
and it's where the Chinese wall starts. It goes 3,000 miles across China. But we were anchored right there and could see the wall where it started. And it was this big headland, must have been 200 or 300 feet high. And we watched the Russians showing the Chinese communists to make gun emplacements up there in big trenches. And we used to stand there on the signal bridge and watch them. And after that, they sent us from there down to Korea, which is a case of going around like this, hanging a right, and you come down the coastline to Korea. And the place was, let's see, they changed the name of it. It's Incheon. It's Incheon now. And it was a big port. And that's where we unloaded a lot of equipment like that. And what we did there was to take the surrender of the Japanese that were in Korea at the end of the war to get them out.
Mm-hmm.
And we, no, that's not right. That part's right, but I went there, they took me and another guy off, and they teamed us up with an officer. I had a lieutenant commander and myself, and we went into Korea on a landing ship dock, which was a ship that the back end could be a dry dock. It had gates at the back. They'd drop them, and they could flood it and run small boats up in there and fold the gate up and pump it dry. And these things would be sitting there in the back of this boat. And Lieutenant Commander and I, we went over and went to Incheon and went into Korea.
Why did they have you do that?
They
You
wanted
taking
pictures taken, yeah. And I guess they just didn't want a sailor running around by himself. And the guy was from Washington State, and I can't remember his name anymore, but he was a real nice guy. There was no rank problem with him. He just he'd help me carry things and like that. He just they're like me, and we got along very well. And we were there for I guess we were there in September. And then they put us back aboard the Rocky Mountain. We went to Shanghai. And we were in Shanghai for, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks. And then we started coming home. And because I had enough points by that time, I was looking forward to getting out. And we came back and came to San Diego. And I think it took us something like 2 weeks to come home. And we spent 8 days of that 2 weeks in a typhoon coming home. And we had been in a number of typhoons prior to getting into China. And one of them, twice, that blew us down between Taiwan and China in that straits that go there between the island and the mainland. And they're pretty rough riding. But coming home, we got in that typhoon. I was sitting down in the hot plate we had, holding the Silex coffee maker on the hot plate, because when the water would get up in the top and the ship rolling, if you didn't hang on to it, it would go flying across the room. You know, Silexes are glass, so you had to go get ship stores and get a new one. So we'd take turns when we were making coffee holding this thing on there. And you get used to the rhythm of a ship in a storm, and you realize, you feel it when it's doing something different. And realized felt like it was climbing and climbing and climbing. And much more so than it had been. And it got up to the top, and you could feel start down the other side of this wave. And of course your propeller comes out of the water, and you get a lot of thump, 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 thump with the drive shaft. And we went skidding down, and all of a sudden it stopped. This big vessel stopped in the ocean. And you wondered what you hit. Well, what you hit was water down at the bottom of this trough. And the front up on the bow, there was a 5-inch gun mounted there. And they had what they called a splinter shield about that high. And it was about 3/8-inch steel that was around for shrapnel to try to stop it from coming in on the guys inside. Well, we hit so hard, it had taken that thing and bent it like this, back around the gun mount. And it sprung some seams, and water was getting inside. And we had picked up some soldiers to bring back to the States. And this water was going down into the quarters they were in. And those poor guys thought we were sinking. And they come barreling out of this thing, some of them with no clothes on, and some of them in their skivvies, whatever, getting topside just in case, the ship was going under. It didn't, praise the Lord. And we weathered that all right, and came on
He
back
didn't
home.
get seasick. He didn't get seasick.
No,
You never got seasick?
One
once,
time.
in one storm, and I was working in the dark room, and we had trays with our chemicals. They were about 2 by 3 feet in length. And everybody had gotten sick and left. And I had some prints in there that I wanted to finish processing. And standing there watching these things doing this, and the ship doing it too. And I started to get seasick. And I up chucked once, and that did it for me. I was all right after that. And I finished what I had to do. Went back to where my bunk was.
So you went to San Diego to muster out? Is that?
We landed there, and no, excuse me, all of us that live east of the Mississippi River, they gave us I don't know, it was 2 or 3 weeks leave to go home. Well, the ones west of the Mississippi, they got 10 days or 2 weeks because they could get to it quicker. And it was a mess in California, around Los Angeles, trying to get out. Because there were so many thousands of servicemen coming back, as this was in February of '46.
So the war was over.
Or January, yeah, the war was over. So you had all kind of guys coming home, you know, about 1,000. And the only way out basically back then was train. Because you didn't have commercial aircraft like you do nowadays. And the admiral had sent an officer, Fluey, because we had 3 airplanes that belonged on the admiral's staff. And it's the lieutenant commander, the admiral, sent him to the States with the names of all us on the staff that lived east of the Mississippi River and our destination, and to get a train tickets out of California. And he got here long before we did, because he flew and we piddled across in a boat. And we had to pay for the ticket, but they had the reservations for it. So all of us on the staff that lived this side of the Mississippi, we had a reservation for a train ticket to come home. So I guess I was in Los Angeles, it was 2 days before I had the reservation came up in effect and we got out. But there was a man named Irving Milhouse that had been friends of our parents, and way back since I was a kid, we knew Irving Milhouse. And they had moved to California years before the war. So while I was there in LA, I looked him up in the phone book and found him and went to visit him. And he was surprised to see me, of course, and everything. Hadn't seen him in years. And that's where one of my days went while we were waiting for the train to come out. And we came back on the El Capitan.
How long did it take to get to Philadelphia from Los Angeles?
I think it was 3 nights,
Well,
basically 4 days.
Did you have a sleeper, or were you just
No.
have a seat?
Just have a seat, reclining seat.
So it was pretty basic travel.
Yeah, it was basic traveling, yeah. There was a diner on board, and you could get your meals, of course, in the diner. And it was basically, there were a few civilians on it, but it was pretty much military people going home.
And did you have to go back after that?
No, while I was home, the ship came around to the East Coast and came in down to Virginia, Little Creek, Virginia, the amphibious base. And I got a telegram, said it was down there and to report down there. And I did, and my mother and dad were coming to Florida. They dropped me off in Little Creek and went down to visit with the Rouse and the Heffelfingers, or the Huntsingers, I mean. And then when my days to get out, I got out up on Long Island, Montauk Point out on the end of the island.
So you went back to your ship and then you were served a little while longer?
Yeah, I think about a week.
Hmm.
And my discharge come up, but you had to go to, the center they had set up to discharge people. So I picked New York, and it gave me a train ride up to New York, and he was there a couple of days while they processed everything. And
It must have been a mess with all the people trying to get out at the same time.
oh yeah. Well, everything you wrote on was just full of service people, you know, going somewhere,
Yeah.
going to camp to get out, or they're out and trying to get back home again. And I went home back to Camden for a couple of days, and then I got a train trip and came down to Fort Pierce where my parents were, and re-met my honey.
Tell us about the first time you guys met.
That's a good question.
He doesn't remember the first time.
So you said.
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember it either, but I was younger than he. He should have remembered. He was about, he was 6 years old. Can you imagine not remembering when you were 6? I was only 2, you know.
3. We're 3 years apart.
Whatever.
Who's counting?
Okay. This Christmas it'll be 3.
Well, at least there's a half a year in there that, you know, it depends on which way you're doing it.
3.5.
2.5. Okay. So,
So you met when you were 4 and 2, but then when did you meet again?
Well, that was when he
well,
got out
this
of the
when I
Navy.
got out of the Navy.
But
back
his mother
at
and my
Dutton
mother
Memorial.
wrote each other. Come sit.
Dutton Memorial Church.
They kept in touch with each other, you know. And she'd send pictures of Jimmy, and Mama would send pictures of me to Mom. And so then,
So tell us about the first time. Whether you were 6 or 2 or whatever age you were.
They were real little.
Real little.
my dad decided he was going to go to get a job in Philadelphia. I never knew why exactly. Guess he figured he'd make more money. And there were some people in White City named Meggett who lived in the north in the winter. And they knew the Heffelfingers and they knew us. And so they said, well, Sam, if you're going to go up there to look for a job, why don't you stay with these nice people? We know they've got a big house. You can stay with them probably. Well, and that was the Heffelfinger. So Daddy did. And then, I don't know time span, but a month or so, Mom said, she knew how much Daddy missed us, so Mom said, why don't you send for Helen and the baby? So Mama and I went up, and we lived with the Heffelfingers. And I would have thought he'd have remembered, but he doesn't. Mama said, I must have been in the summertime because she said he went to Bible school. And I would stand and cry when he would walk down the street going to Bible school.
Aww. Did you play together?
I don't know. Probably not. He probably thought I was too little. I don't know. And then after we'd been there a while, then Daddy got an apartment in Philadelphia, and we moved over there. But I came across a letter from Mama not long ago. She was writing to Aunt Frances, and she said Marion, that's Mom, had invited us over for dinner. And so after we lived in Philadelphia, they kept in touch. But then I guess Dad just, or maybe Mama was too much of a cracker or something. I don't know. I don't know why they ended up coming back. but they did. So, this is Daddy's story, not mine.
It's ours.
Well, anyway, then by the time we met, I guess, how old were you? Again?
46. I was 24.
And I was about 20.
22?
About 21.
21. I didn't go back to college after Daddy died, so I was home. If I had gone back, I wouldn't have met him, so it worked out the best.
So what did you do after the service then?
I went back with my job at Bud's, and because back then, if you left the company to go into service, they had to give you your job back. It was a federal law. So I went back there and applied for my job, and they laid a guy off and gave me my job back. So
Poor guy.
I worked there for a while, and decided I wanted to change jobs. So my dad's cousin, Charlie Macon, was vice president of Camden Fire Insurance Company. So he used a little family relationship and got a job with Camden Fire. And I worked there for them a couple of years. And you remember Charlie James?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he passed away, by the way. I got a
Oh.
letter last week from his wife. I helped him get a job in Camden Fire, and after I'd been there a while. So he and I worked there for a while. And then an opening came up for a company in Philadelphia, an insurance company, needed an inland marine underwriter, which was what I was doing. I guess they don't have inland marine anymore, but I don't know where they ever got the name, but in that department, we'd insure cargo and trucks and transportation, jewelry, fine arts, horses, dogs, it's just a lot of things they didn't know where to put, and they put in what they called inland marine underwriting. So I went over and took this job with this outfit in Philadelphia, and then moved on to another company, the Pearl American Group in Philadelphia for a while. I left them when we moved to Florida. That's where I was working when I left, and your mom and I and you moved to Florida.
Yeah. Would this be a good time for a break? For a break?
Dad has something he wants to say?
Well, we'll just let him say what he wants.
What did you say?
I don't want to be in the. I'm not going to be in the picture. Am
No.
You can't see my feet, can you?
No.
Oh,
can
look
smell
at his
them,
feet
though.
sticking out there.
I? Oh, look at the
What?
red
Oh, cannot.
So what do you want Dad to talk about?
What do you want to talk about, Klein?
Talk about your dog.
No, Lisa, something important.
He has some stuff in his folder. Do you have some stuff you want to tell us that we haven't asked you?
He loves you.
Oh, we love him too.
I don't know. I didn't know what you had in mind. Kim had said something about maybe asking questions. I didn't know how far back you wanted to go, or frontward you wanted to go.
What's the full names of your parents and where were you born? I know when it was.
Okay. I was born March the 19th, 1922 in Hanneman Hospital in Philadelphia.
So you were born in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't sure if you were born there or in Canada.
And My mother's name was Marion Clements Bain Heffelfinger, and my dad was Levi Brendel Bain, or Heffelfinger, excuse me. And my mother's mother was Sue Root White, and my grandfather was Louis Cassuth Bain, and they lived in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. And they both had been born and raised down in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which is down around Chester and Media,
It's so pretty down there.
are the two towns down there. And my grandfather Bain was born in and raised at a railroad station down there. Apparently, his father, Ezariah Bain, was station master. They lived upstairs. I was there at the station once or twice with my mother and grandmother. And my grandfather's sister, Hannah, apparently took it over as station mistress after my grandfather had died. I think he died in 1893. And it was just one set of tracks and this real neat old 2.5-story house. And the downstairs was the train station part, and they lived in the upstairs part. And was my grandfather, Louis, my Aunt Hannah, and a brother Abel. And I think there was one other child in the family that I never knew anything about. But I knew my grandfather. I was about 13 when my grandfather Bain died. And we were over there at their house, and I remember that. We were there the night he died, and I remember that. And my grandmother Bain came to our wedding. She was 80-something. And she drove down with my mother and dad, and the 3 people in the car, she's the only one who could get out. We're 2 kind of stove in for the trip down there. And Granny just kind of popped out.
You didn't tell about your mama's family, your dad's family.
Oh, my dad's mother was Elizabeth Mathis, and my grandfather was Levi Pennypacker Heffelfinger, and he was born up in Pennsylvania. My grandmother was born in Jersey, and I don't know how they ever got together. But my grandfather, Levi Pennypacker, he's the one who was in the Civil War, and he died, I think it was 1908, so I never knew him. But my grandmother, Heffelfinger, she lived with us all my life. She was there, and she died, I think it was 1943.
Wow.
I was home when she died.
She was pretty old then.
She's in her 80s, yeah. And I think she was born in 1861. I think it was. And just, she had a brother. His name must have been Cecil. Everybody called him Uncle Seal. And I just assumed Cecil was where they would get Seal as a nickname. And there was 2 sisters. 2 besides my grandmother. This Charlie Macon, it was my dad's cousin I mentioned earlier. His mother was Anna Macon, and she had been a Mathis too. So it was Anna Mathis Macon. There was Jennifer Mathis Brower, and my grandmother, and then Uncle Seal. He was married to a woman named Mary, but they never had any children. And Mary Jane, my cousin, is the offspring of the Macon side. Her dad and my dad were first cousins. Aunt Jen, who was the Brower, she married a guy named Charlie Brower. They had, let's see, Willie, George, and Ed, 3 boys. They were about my dad's age. Ed was married and didn't have any children. Willie had been married, didn't have any children. And George, I'm not sure about him. I kind of think he was married, but they never had any children.
So he never had any first cousins?
So I don't have any first cousins because none of these people in the generation to produce first cousins to me had any kids.
Huh.
And my mother's
Missed
brother,
And then,
he and his wife never had any kids. So Mary Jane and her brother Charlie were the closest cousins I got. And I don't know how it goes, whether they're second cousins once removed or what it is, but they're sure not very close. And, counting people like that. And I guess that's one reason why I've been trying to find this genealogy business, to find out who had what and where.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real surprise to find this guy with Bain ancestry. That he and I had the same great-great-grandfather, and he lives out in Ohio. And he was born the year I went in the Navy. But he's got a whole mess of people on his side of the family, and my side of the Baines didn't have kids.
tell about your Granny Heffelfinger. She always seemed so neat to me. She was always,
Yeah, she was.
had all these rubber dollars and things like that.
Rubber dollars?
That's what
That's
he
what we
called
used to
them.
call.
The only
She could stand under my arm when I'd stand up and hold my arm out like that, and she could fit right in here, height-wise. And my grandfather was about 5'2", the one that he was a fifer in the Civil War.
Huh.
He was about 5'2", is all he was.
Levi Pennypacker.
Yeah. And my dad was about 5'9", 8'9", something like that.
I don't think he was that tall.
And anyhow, my grandmother and that lived with us, and she's a real neat lady. And every day, of course, later years, she had had a lot of heart trouble, and wasn't able to get around real well. But every afternoon, she'd go in and take a bath and come out and get all dressed up. Not to go to church, but, in a nice little afternoon outfit every day, whether she was going anywhere or not.
I used to do that.
And we had some friends that she had known for years that lived about 3 blocks away from us, down on 27th Street. And once in a while, she'd pack up and decide she could go see Mildred and her family. So she'd go, and she'd walk most of the time. And then invariably we'd get a call from Mildred. Miss Lizzie don't think she can make it home. Can somebody come get her? So somebody get the car and run down and get Granny.
And she had this sister, Jen, your Aunt
Yeah.
Jen, and they were always, she would drive a car, right? She could
Jen
drive.
could, yeah.
And they go on these jaunts and get into trouble.
Jen would usually get them in trouble, and somebody had to go rescue them. This is back like in the 30s, where cars weren't like cars today, you know. And one time, I don't know how she did it, but she got it caught in the trolley tracks on down the street.
Where were the trolley tracks?
Well, where the trolley
The
cars
trolley car
ran.
In
runs
Fort
like a
Pierce?
They
train.
had, no.
This was at Camden.
Up north,
Okay.
up in Camden. They ran, the trolleys ran on rail, electrified, and got power up from electric wire. And Jen got down in there and couldn't get the thing out. Well, back in those days, the tires were about this wide on cars. It would fit within the rail, but you, with that little tire, you couldn't get it turned enough for it to grip on the rail to get out. You had to go down to where a street crossed it, and usually there was enough pavement there that you could get, get the wheel to turn and get out. Well, Jen is always doing something like that, and invariably Granny was with her. And
And they laughed. You know,
they had a
so much
good
fun
time,
about
the
it.
two of them. And Aunt Annie, the other sister, of course I don't know her, or never knew her when she was young, but she didn't seem to, when they were all around 70 or 80, Aunt Annie didn't have that same spirit of adventurism that Jen and Granny had. But,
All I know about Aunt Annie is that every time they would get together for a family dinner, every time it was time to clear up, Aunt Annie'd have to go to the bathroom. And so Mom, Heffelfinger was, if anybody went like this, she said, "Oh,
Goofed
you're
off.
doing an Aunt Annie on us." That's the only thing
but
that stood out about her.
about Granny's rubber dollars, she got a pension from my grandfather's service in the Civil War.
Yeah.
And I've got the papers home that came from the government. The first one she got was $12 a month. And she got a couple increases over the years. In the last few years she was alive, she got $30 a month as my grandfather's pension. And that's where her rubber dollars came from.
That's all the money she got.
She'd get that $30, and I could always hit her up for one of her rubber dollars when I needed a buck for something, but she,
Mom always would say when he'd get in trouble with her, Granny would, come upstairs and she had something for him, or a rubber dollar, or, her money just stretched. And I don't know that Mom knew, that Granny Heffelfinger knew that your mom knew, but your mom did know that she did that.
and they all three of them were raised on a farm up there in Burlington County. And there's a cemetery there in Burlington County. It sits on top of the hill, and in this little town out
Isn't that
out in the
Mount Holly?
country. No, it's outside of Mount Holly. Right now, the name of it's escaped me, but my grandfather's Bane, his brother Abel, is buried in that cemetery.
It's two totally
And-
different sides of the family.
and
You
I
can't
don't know
figure
why.
that one out.
Because he was born in Pennsylvania, and why he ended up over there, and he was a machinist, was his trade, and there were a lot of knitting mills and things around that back in those days in Jersey, and he might have worked in one of them, that's the reason he was buried there, but that, cause I went there to the cemetery, with mother and grandmother a couple times. So I know that is where he's buried, but I sure don't know why it's over there. You find out a lot of these things that in your family you can't keep track of or find out, you know, why.
And his dad had a sister. His dad's dad had been married before. He was quite a lot older than your grandmother, wasn't he?
19 years older than
And
my
he'd
grandma.
been married before, hadn't he?
Yeah. But the
But the sister was his own sister.
yeah,
And she died at an
Yeah, she
early
was-
age, so Pop didn't have any sisters
she was just
anymore.
a little child when
So
she
it was
died.
just, you know,
Uh,
it was a small family.
and rest of there's gangs of Heffelfingers over Pennsylvania, and some of them are distant relatives of mine, but there were two girls,
Doris,
Doris and
Betty Jane.
Betty Jane. You know, she married a guy named Troxel, and usually I saw them when we went up to Norristown for a funeral of somebody else. And, but Mary Jane and Jake Troxel, they came and visited Fort Pierce one time. And I've written to her for the last address I had, and it's come back. I don't know what's happened to them. And I tried calling the phone number I had, and it was somebody else that didn't know anything about them. I haven't been able to trace them. I guess maybe they're dead by now, but because they're all up there about my age. And Doris, she was one that kind of went her own way. She was married and divorced and living with some other guy for a
That
while.
long
And
time when you didn't do that.
had a couple of kids and lost track of them, and a whole bunch of them. I don't know whatever happened to that side of it.
But they're all
And,
real nice people. They are. They're really nice people.
They
They were
were.
very friendly to me.
But I was real tickled to find this guy out in Ohio. And Kim and Clyde have both seen it.
And what's his name?
Ron McAvoy, and his mother had been a Bain. And he's the one sent me a book that he put together on Bain. And they go back to 1680 in Pennsylvania. And he's got the whole list all the way down. And when we got the book, I found out my grandparents are in it, my mother and dad are in it, and Betty and I are in it. And we met after the fact that he had made the book. So
Cool.
Oh,
pretty
that was
pretty neat.
interesting, yeah.
How'd you run across him?
on the internet.
Just on the internet, I had put my name in one of these genealogy sites, and about a week later I got this email from this guy, and went to know a little bit, and I told him what little bit I know. The next thing I know, he said, we got the same great-great-grandfather.
Isn't that something?
And
That really tickled him because he just had never had family, you know, and that just, he had, his Uncle Byron, his mother's brother, his wife, had put together a Bain genealogy, but he had never seen it. He always wanted to see it, and after they both died, he never knew what happened to it. And he always kind of bemoaned the fact that he had never, she was very methodical. Everything she did was right, you know, it would have been perfect. And he always just wished he could have had that, you know. Well, now he's got it. you
So
know.
the McAvoy guy ended up with that.
No, I
No,
think he
he
did it
all
on
did
his
this
own.
on his own.
I just figured it out.
Yeah.
But
For all the Bains he was trying to trace down, and he got all this business, and he went back to Delaware County a number of times, he told me, and had gone through the courthouse records and that kind of stuff is where he got them all together. But,
Now, did he find any evidence of your ancestors that came from Europe?
yeah, this Alexander Bain is the one he traced us back to. Came from Scotland, from Edinburgh, Scotland, around 1680. With what he said, as far as I can tell, had a brother, Marmaduke Bain, that came with him about the same time. Azariah, Marmaduke, oh goodness. And that's where he figures is when our part of the family came here to this country.
What about the Heffelfinger clan? Did you know any more about that?
No, I haven't got a hit on there, anything like that. There's a guy by the name of Martin Heffelfinger that came from Switzerland in 1740 to Norristown, Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And Norristown's just about 30 miles from Philadelphia. It's the next county, northwest of Philadelphia County. And it seems like we came from this Martin Heffelfinger that came out of Switzerland back then. And I don't know, I've been able to find out where. There were some Heffelfingers on the American side in the Revolutionary War here in this country. And there was a guy in Kansas that had written a book about the Heffelfinger. And he goes back to some of them that were in the Revolutionary War. And I found this in the library. And I tried to get the book through an interloan in the library. And I got a card back, said they couldn't find it. I don't know whether they didn't try very hard or whether they really couldn't. But I've seen it listed a couple places. But I haven't been able to get on to it yet. I don't know. But, my early days goes back to a lot of horse and buggy stuff. Like the milkman was horse-drawn wagon that delivered to our house. The Iceman come by with a horse-drawn wagon. And the Fruhoff Bakery had a horse-drawn wagon. They come around and deliver bread to you. And
Was that in Camden?
yeah, and the big department stores in Philadelphia, Wanamaker's and Gimbel's and Strawbridge and Clothier. When I was a kid in the late 20s, they all had horse-drawn wagons for delivery wagon, where if you bought something from them and had it delivered, it would come in their own horse-drawn wagon. And
The fire
it
department?
was all steam engine.
The fire department? I thought you had
Yeah, there was one fire department in Philadelphia when I was a kid, out near my grandmother, where we'd get off the trolley when we'd go visit her. That had horses pulling the wagon, and that was exciting to see. I remember one time we got off the wagon or off the trolley as they came out of the firehouse, and that was exciting to see that. And you know, you've seen these pictures of the smoke pouring out of the back of this thing. Well, that was the pumper, and they were steam. The pumps are operated by steam. So this was a big tank of water, and the firebox was down in the bottom on this wagon, and the whole 4 horses pulled it. And because what you see coming out of the top is the smoke from the fire. And they'd get up ahead of steam so that the pumps would work when they get to the fire. This was like 1929, 1930. And it was the last firehouse in Philadelphia, to my knowledge, that went to fire engine, fire truck, motorized.
That's pretty neat.
And there's all these, you see these old pictures of these horse-drawn fire engines.
You made one for Tim.
Hmm?
You made one for Tim.
Yeah.
You found a picture of the horse-drawn fire truck and you put
Yeah.
it up. He loves that picture. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Mhm. And they even, we had a firehouse on 27th Street. It's about 3-4 blocks from where we live, on Stevens Street. And they were all conventional fire engines, gasoline powered. But their pumper was the same thing. It was this big tube on the back of a fire engine, and the firebox was in the bottom. And they kept a fire in there all the time. It was banked, so they always had a fire. So the water was to some degree warm. You know, it wasn't like starting out with a cold 100 gallon of water to heat up, or 200 gallon. So it was always warm, and they'd get an alarm, and they'd start stuffing coal in there and get the fire going. By the time they got to their fire, they had a head of steam. And the airplanes were pretty rickety. My first airplane ride was in the Navy down at the Tumwa Air Station, and it was one of the Stearman biplanes, you know, 2 sets of wing, and there are 2 holes where you sat, for a pilot and an observator in the other hole. And the guy came out, one of these cadets learning to fly, and I was talking to him on the way out to where the airplane was. He said, "You want to go for a ride?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Go get a parachute and come on, I'll take you for a ride." And I come to find out, just as we were climbing in the thing, he made the remark, he said, "This is the first flight since I got out of the hospital I crashed up out here."
Oh, come on.
And, oh, good, that's great. I was scared to death most of that trip. That was wild from my point of view. But that was my first airplane
And
ride.
he doesn't like heights anyway.
And I flew a couple more times in those things, taking some pictures. And out of one, I'm out of the back seat. And just stand up and hang over the side with a handheld camera and take your pictures. And when I was out in the Philippines, we had a PBY, which is a flying boat. And you got a boat hull, and at the tail section came up on an angle, had 2 engines, and a wing on top of the fuselage. Pilot and co-pilot, and had a couple gun mounts on the side. And there was a trap door in this part that started to go up. And I had to take some vertical pictures of Corregidor. They're on the Corregidor, the fork. And I was sitting on the edge of this hole like this, taking pictures.
With your feet hanging out?
Huh?
With your feet out?
My feet hanging out, yeah. You almost got a lot smart. And it was a K20 camera, which from the back where the film was to the end of the lens was about that long and about that wide across the top, and you had a crank here that advanced the film with a trigger in it to take the picture, operate the shutter. Oh, I remember I was like this, taking some pictures and cranking this thing, and all of a sudden we hit an air pocket or something, and I felt myself going this way. And I had sense enough to come back this way, and with the camera, to throw my hands back like that and got my feet out of this hole. So this all happened real quick. And I leveled out, and we went around hunting a rope, tied it around me before I went back and hung my feet over the hole. And
And then you had, on the helicopters, they'd take the doors off and you'd have to hang out the window to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, out the door.
But we had a PBY and a DC-3 that was on this admiral's staff. And we had taken the DC-3 and went up to Samar Island in the Philippines to get a bunch of cargo that had come in. And I went because there was photography stuff in the cargo, make sure, you know, we got it, it didn't go somewhere else. Well, we were kind of overloaded. We picked up some people to take back to the main airport in Manila. And I heard the pilot and the co-pilot talking about the weight, and we finally realized that we really had more in there than we're supposed to. But you know, we had to go anyhow. And on Samar, the airstrip was on a hunk of land here that they had cleared. Here was a bay out here, and the landing strip were these steel mats they used during the war. They'd interlock together and they could lay them down for a runway to land on. So when we landed, this wing was out over the bay, and you got on these steel mats. And then we got the whole thing loaded up. So we had to do the same thing leaving, go this way, and your left wing was out over the bay. And we barely got off the ground, really, because some of the trees down at the end hit the fuselage and when we were coming up. But we got up all right. Went over and got to Manila, and we had the tower told us to circle around. Well, we clean off that airplane that crashed on the runway ahead of you.
Oh, gosh.
So we circled around a few times and could watch him pulling this mess off the runway. Came back and they got permission to land, and the tower told the pilot when we got down, he just about cut our engines to land. And the tower said, watch that crosswind. About that time, we started doing this and put the starboard wing in the ground and started spinning around.
Okay.
And thank goodness we came back and landed on the wheels. And I was thinking the other night, I don't know why it came to me, but I was telling your mother, amongst the people we were bringing back, there was a young ensign, and I don't know, he got shook up with this, and he got out of his seat, and here's fire engines running alongside of us and crash trucks. And he's running down the aisle, and here's the door to get off. And he said, I'm getting out here. And we were doing about, I don't know, 50, 60 miles an hour. You know, we hadn't stopped yet. So when he passed me, I went like this and grabbed him. And I was buckled in my seat, so we stayed. And I said, you ain't going out that door. I said, you get out there and you get killed or something. We argued, but he stayed there. And we came back and got settled down, and we were all right, tore some of the end of the wing off where we had stuck it in the ground. You know, when you talk about flying today, you hear about some old pilots talk about flying by the seat of their pants, and a lot of it was, you went about the way you felt, because outside a fighter plane, there weren't many that would go over 200 miles an hour. I mean, that was fast back in that period of time. And these biplanes that we were flying, or the primary training plane, Stearmans, they'd leave the ground at 45 miles an hour, and you could land at 45 to 50 miles an hour. And going full bore, when you got airborne, you might hit 120 with one of them, but you know, these jets land faster than that that you have today, and it's just a completely different thing. So,
Praise God you got home safe.
yeah, praise the Lord. I didn't get to be an ensign.
Yeah, that was good.
On one of those stupid little landing craft that put most of them in.
That worked out good.
Yeah.
Talk about Mr. Johnson. I don't know. I only heard you talk once about how he had a railroad car that would take him on vacation and you'd follow in her cars.
Yeah.
I don't think Lisa knows about any of that stuff.
He would, Eldridge R. Johnson, and my dad chauffeured for him for 20-some years till he died. He started the Victor Talking Machine Company, and Edison had developed a phonograph, and he had these round tubes, Edison did, that were wax and that put the impression for sound on them. Well, Mr. Johnson developed a way to make a flatter records as we know records. And he, I don't know the details about this, but he sold out his idea and Victor Talking Machine Company to RCA, Radio Corporation of America, that you're all well aware of, broadcasting and everything else. And for years, they used it, Victor Talking Machine Company on their logo. And that picture you gave me of an old-fashioned gramophone and the dog listening to his master's voice, well, that was their logo. It went on their label. Well, Mr. Johnson made a pile of money when he sold out to RCA and retired. And like I said, my dad chauffeured for him for years. And
They lived in Philadelphia?
he lived in Morristown, New Jersey, about 20 miles from Camden. And he had an 11-acre estate up there. And so to answer your question, he had a 4,000-acre plantation down in North Carolina, in Pinehurst, North Carolina. And in town of Pinehurst, he had a real big house. I don't know how to describe it. For those period of times, it was a mansion. And he'd get a private car on the railroad, and there was a siding came in the back of his 11-acre home there in Morristown. And he'd get on his private car out there, and the railroad would come along, hook an engine up to it and put it on the train, hooked it up to the train going to North Carolina. And then my dad was supposed to get in the Rolls Royce and meet the train in North Carolina. That you had to get with it. But that's how they do it. And then he would haul him around down while he was there on his vacation. And
Did you get to go on those vacations to North Carolina?
I went once. I guess I must have been 10 years old. Mother and I went down on the train and met my dad. down there and spent a couple of days. My dad had asked Mr. Johnson, could he do this? And he had said yes. So then we rode back with my father from there in the car. And Mr. Johnson had a yacht with, I think something like 170, 180 feet long. And man, it was really plush. He had a crew of 42 men on it all the time. The whole old man Johnson and his wife around.
Jeez.
And it had an elevator in it. I was parked in the Delaware, anchored in the Delaware one time, and Dad took Mother and I over on it one night. And the captain took us all the way through all the living quarters and the whole, got the view,
You
the
have a
whole
book
thing.
of it,
And I got a book of it at home.
all the pictures.
And it had a gyroscope stabilizer in it. One of the few, very few private vessels that did. And it had a chart in the back, like a seismograph would make. And it showed how much the ship would roll in pitch and bad weather without it. And then the same thing when they turned it on, how it would stabilize this vessel. And all it was a great, huge, big top. It turned real quick. I can't remember. The book got the revolutions and so forth in it. And so he died in, I think it was 43. And his estate was probated at $150 million. And that was a lot of money in those days.
43.
You know,
Money,
yeah.
but yeah.
It, what, 5 times as much as, 10 times it, nowadays,
Oh, yeah.
the dollars we got today.
Wow.
And he'd go to Bar Harbor most every
Yeah.
year and
I went up there
We
a
went
couple
several
of summers
times.
with my dad when he'd go up to Bar Harbor for the summer.
down to Atlantic City.
And he had a house in Atlantic City, right on the boardwalk. And actually, it was Ventnor. It's just south of Atlantic City limits. And it was right out on the boardwalk, a big house. And back in about 8 blocks away, they had a big 10-car garage and 2 apartments upstairs. And we'd get one of the apartments for a couple of weeks in the summer. Pat the gardener, he had the other apartment. He had to work there all the time, so he had it all the time. And Mrs. Johnson's chauffeur, Frank, he'd alternate with us, with his family, for the other apartment for the summertime. But it was interesting. And your turn. You tell them something about White City.
This is your show.
Was Bebop working for Mr. Johnson when you were born?
When I was born, no. He was working for a Prizer family in Philadelphia that were into banking or something like that when I was real young.
He was a chauffeur then,
Yeah,
still at that time.
That was his trade.
He had gone into he was selling Rolls Royces, and that's where Mr. Johnson met him over in Philadelphia and asked him to come drive for him. And
Yeah,
it was more than a chauffeur, really. They were good friends. He was. Pop talked a lot about him. He must have been a really nice man. And he would say, Leon, you know, when you've got money like this, you don't know who your friends are. You know, everybody wants to be your friend, but you don't really know who likes you for yourself. You know, and he really thought a lot of Pop, and they just Pop thought a lot of him.
yeah, it's every afternoon. Pop's chauffeuring job with Mr. Johnson was easy. It was 8 to 5. And back in those days, well, they didn't have social life. Mr. Johnson and his wife. You know, they weren't in high society or anything. Most of those chauffeurs that drove back in those days, if their people went to parties or anything, at night after working all day, they had to take them and hang around until they came home. And you know, that it wasn't all that good of a job. But my dad was really reasonable. It was like working in an office, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, something like that. And
that was during Depression days when a lot of people
yeah, it
didn't
was
have
through the
steady jobs.
Depression.
And that was
so
a
he
good
always had a
job.
job with $60 a week, which back in the Depression was well, $150 buying power today, I guess. And because
And he'd play with his kids, and he'd get to ride their ponies and
Yeah,
things
get
like
to
that.
ride.
You know, it
he had a
was-
grandson named Eldridge. That was my age. And he had horses and never rode them. So when Dad worked on Saturday, I'd go out with him and he'd take me over to Eldridge's estate. And of course Dad was friendly with the chauffeurs for that family. So I'd stay there and ride Eldridge's horses. And then Dad get ready to go home, he'd come by and pick me up and we'd go home. And I remember one time I had a bicycle, regular bicycle, and we were going to Atlantic City and I wanted to take my bike. Well, one of the chauffeurs for Eldridge was going down with the family station wagon. And he said, if you can get out here, I'll take your bicycle down there for you. I said, okay. So I started pedaling my bike to 20 miles up to Morristown. And a bread truck came by. And he stopped at a store. And he came by again, he wasn't going very fast. So I grabbed a hold of the tailgate. Now that, man, this is better than pedaling. I don't know how fast he got going, but I decided the better part of valor was leave go of the tailgate. So I ended up having to pedal the rest of the way.
You never
But,
told me that.
I got there and they took my bicycle to Atlantic City for me. But my dad found that out. He wouldn't let me ride it home when we came back. He got a pickup or something and brought it home to me.
Tell about the time you were driving the Packard in the garage and you wrinkled the side of it or something?
That was down in Atlantic City,
That
wasn't
was
it?
in Atlantic City, yeah. They had 2 Rolls Royces and a Packard and a Cadillac parked in this garage. Like I said, it was had room for 10 cars, and there were shower stalls over one side and bathroom over there. And telephone was over there in the corner, and my dad was into John, I think,
And Pop had a temper.
and
Yeah, you did.
my dad could get angry pretty quick, and he said to me, do you think you can move that Packard? I had a driver's license. I had a little Model A4. And I said, yeah. Well, there were, I don't know now, 2 or 3 pillars about this big, concrete pillars that supported the apartment upstairs in the roof. And I was trying to be real careful and back out and not hit the door. And I lost track of where this pillar was. And I found out where it was when I put the fender into it. And Father heard it. And he said, remember, there's 2 sides to that damn thing. And I I said, yes, sir. And I think I quit right there. Well, I got in more trouble than that, but,
Did they make you fix it?
no, that didn't make
His
me
bark
fix
was worse than his bite, but he sure had a bark.
it.
I love Pop.
Yeah, he was a lot of fun a lot of times. You
never
kids
could-
had some fun with him, yeah.
I never could
When
figure
he-
why people call him Happy.
Yeah, you know,
That
when
was
he
his-
worked in Philadelphia, when he worked for the Rolls Royce people, and like that, everybody called him Happy.
Your mom called him Happy.
And that mother did all the time. She never called him Lee or Levi or Leon. And you'd call up over there. If mother called over for him for something, if she just said, and I talked to Leon or Lee, they didn't know who she's talking about.